Thank you. It's a great privilege to be here again and just to see what's going on. And clearly you can see the center of the world moving in this direction from Europe and the U.S. to here. This topic of global leadership, the next generation, is just an incredibly important topic, as we all know. Not to make it sound like a cliche, but clearly we're all beginning to realize the tremendous change that our world's about to be involved in. And we've seen tremendous change so far, but I think most of us are beginning to realize it's just going to accelerate into the future. The availability of incredible amounts of low-cost, high-quality global resources, new technologies, free flow of capital, deregulation. Literally, our world's going to change, and every industry is going to be turned upside down. I think there's no doubt that we're looking toward a period of, being real candid, tremendous pain and tremendous opportunity. So global leadership is essential. At the time that all this change is going on, it's also clear that our world is becoming much more interrelated and interdependent. You know, when a subprime crisis in the U.S. or the potential of a recession has such an incredible impact around the world. As we've spent here and talked about all kinds of issues, literally half the questions are all about, what do you think the recession is going to do and how is it going to impact the suppliers? So our world is getting more complex and more difficult, with more opportunities, but the need for global leadership is just absolutely essential. The idea I want to present to you is a global leadership or a leadership continuum. And that continuum begins with the concept of being a global supplier, then a global partner, and then a global leader. And clearly, you can be a leader in the world, and that's very different in my mind than being a global leader. Being an Indian leader or a U.S. leader is different than being a global leader, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I also thought it was worth talking about, because it was one of the first questions I had when I was invited to the topic. You know, what kind of credentials do you have? You know, what is your perspective on this? And I think my number one credential is I'm old. And I knew I was old before I got here. Being on this panel, I really know I'm old. But yesterday was a real bummer day. That's an American term. I'm sitting in this discussion, listening to panelists, and it's just excellent. And then I noticed the title, India at age 60. India at age 60. I'm 61. I am older than India. This has been very unsettling. If I lose my way during the presentation, I babble, don't make sense. Just patience. He's older than India. So I do think I have two other criteria. Literally in the last 20 years, we at TPI, what we do is we represent buyers with the evaluation, negotiation, and management of sourcing transactions, typically outsourcing transactions. Literally over 20 years, we've done more than almost $400 billion of transactions in terms of the amount per year times the number of years. And the beauty of our business is we do the deal, we renegotiate the deal, we structure the deal so we get a nice multiplier. When we started out, and some of this is painful to share with you, when we started out, IBM Global Services didn't exist. Accenture was not in the outsourcing business. In fact, they were called Anderson Consulting. As we've seen over time, and we've been able to work with not only great suppliers, but great buyers, if you will, tremendous change. We've seen Arthur Anderson, a great firm, no longer exists. We've seen the dot-com suppliers with tremendous potential, and now, you know, not many of them are still around. And then we've seen the emergence of the Indian players. So I do have that perspective. Being a little bit old, I'm not sure I can remember a whole ton of it, but that is my perspective. The other part is just TPI. We're a small company, and in many ways we're very different from the Indian heritage providers, but at the same time, our businesses and our futures are very closely tied together. And so what I want to do is share some of the changes that we've gone through along the way too, and you can kind of pick out, you know, what might be applicable to you. When we first started out, we started out in the U.S., and I would say that we were a global supplier. We initially worked for U.S.-based companies, as we did work for them, and they were global. They took us to Europe and to Asia. When we went to Europe and Asia, the U.S. portion of the company was very pleased with us. The foreign portion of the company didn't like us at all. We were the company from a foreign perspective or a non-U.S. perspective that you had to use versus the ones you wanted to use. So we were used, but we were those other guys. And it was, on the one hand, it was good financially. We had certain kind of salespeople, sales support in other countries, but literally all the delivery people and everything was from the U.S. So it was quite an unbalance from a European perspective. Sales supplier. And I think some of the Indian firms are in that position. Then there became the point where we made the choice to be a global partner. A big, key, and important choice, and expensive and painful in some ways. At that point in time, we decided that we would go locally. We would hire executives who had history. We would change our culture to be consistent with the local culture. And we would really be global partners. And there was a balance there in terms of the value that we were receiving as a U.S. company versus as a global partner. When we came to India not looking at our back office, but we came hiring the absolute best people who would be world-class suppliers, and we integrated them into our compensation systems and reward systems just like everybody else. So we became a global partner. On the one hand, it was painful, it was expensive, caused a lot of turmoil, but our business has been incredibly expanded because we became global partners. In this progression from global supplier to global partner, I would suggest the next step is global leader, and two major criteria to be a global leader. The first criteria is to survive multiple economic cycles. To be a global leader just during the happy times and the good times, I'm not sure that's the real test of a global leader. Having gone through multiple economic cycles and to have to reinvent yourself again, I think that puts you in a category of a global leader. We've seen multiple companies go through this. Some have made it, some haven't. As I've gone through this and watched both suppliers and buyers at the same time, there's a lot of key leadership criteria, but I've mentioned three for the sake of a time. The first is have a real vision, and it's not an incremental vision, it's an incremental change from what you're doing, but it's a stepwise level change. So leaders who have a vision for the future. The second quality would be courage. All of us can see the future, we can see some of the changes, we know what we need to do in many cases, but having the courage to make those decisions. Having the courage to make those decisions, especially when margins are shrinking, your stock price is going down, and you have to make those strong investments in new products and new techniques, and it's not incremental, but it's step level. There's also the tendency, and I know in my own part we were a little slow to make some changes, and just for our business, it was only like 2 or 3 years ago when literally 90% of our business was related to like transaction business. If to relate that maybe to the Indian heritage firms, I might equate that to labor arbitrage or time and materials or various forms of that. Literally in 2 or 3 years, that business is now less than 50% of our revenues.